Welcome to History and Future of Mostly Higher Education. Hi, welcome back. It's week 4, segment 4, and paradigm shift 3. We're going to be talking again about the future of higher education, and this lesson is about rethinking liberal arts as a startup curriculum for resilient global citizens. I'm here with my friend Lauren Dubois, who is the co-director of the Haiti Lab, director of a new institute on campus called Scholars in Publics, and professor of history and Romance studies. And why I asked Lauren to be with us today is because the Haiti Lab, for me, exemplifies Guattari's idea of resilience. Resilience is a concept of no matter what the world throws at you, you've been prepared enough to be able to somehow cope with it, deal with it, and maybe, if you're really doing it well, throw it right back. The idea of the liberal arts as a startup curriculum for resilient global citizenship is that in America we have an idea of general education and liberal arts. We don't really use it as a tool. In many European countries and other countries around the world, education is far more vocational. And the idea we're pushing for this idea of the paradigm shift, and you'll find more about this on the website, is Amartya Sen's idea that all education is vocational education. By that he means that the chief vocation in life is to lead an engaged, committed life in society. And that a good liberal arts education prepares you for all that ways to be an active global citizen. So that's a lot. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lauren to talk about what you had in mind when you started the Haiti Lab and the different ways that it was both interdisciplinary, lots of different disciplines were involved, but also something that was really about engagement in the world.
Well, the Haiti Lab was, of course, part of a bigger experiment in humanities labs that had been percolating for a long time. But then we were the first of these labs, particularly at the Franklin Humanities Institute. And I guess the main brief was in some ways fairly simple, which was to think about humanities-centered project, but one that would link to other parts of the university, to other schools. And so in our case, we started really with global health and law, eventually worked with the environment school as well. And the other was to find innovative ways to bridge undergraduate, graduate, and faculty research and teaching in some way. So with that was essentially our opening brief. The other context was, of course, that the Haiti earthquake had taken place in 2010 of January. We had begun kind of mobilizing in many different ways to respond and to sort of think about how we might respond both, sort of concretely in Haiti and how we might respond to also the discourse of Haiti and the debates about Haiti from the kind of position of research that we'd been cultivating here for some time. And so the lab became also a place to think about what types of response might come out. And the lab then produced a wide variety, a wide spectrum of responses, many of which we had not imagined when we began the project. So we also were about having an open space where new ideas could kind of emerge and percolate as much as possible.
Had you had partners in Haiti even before the Haiti earthquake? Because I know one of the things you did was actually maintain some of those partnerships.
Yeah, I mean, we had, again, there were really two of us. Me and my co-director, Deborah Jensen, were the two specialists here mostly focused on Haiti. And both of us had arrived actually not that long ago, so I had been here, how many years? Just a few years before then, and her just a few years as well. So we had cultivated research links with universities in Haiti. We'd had a colleague, actually it so happened that a close colleague, Jean Casimir, who is a former ambassador of the United States, but also an eminent sociologist in Haiti, was teaching here the semester right after the earthquake. So he helped in some ways as we conceived of the lab, and we continued to have a lot of links with him, and through him a number of other faculty members as well. And then also in parallel there was a Duke Engage program that had existed in Haiti for about 20 years now, I think, so it had long been there, run out of global health. We made one of the people who runs that program, Kathy Walmer, she was a core faculty in the lab. And so we also had that link to a Duke Engage program, which is situated in a women's health clinic in Haiti. So there were a couple of places that we could connect with.
Tell us a little bit about the kinds of courses students took in conjunction with the lab, and then how those translate into the work that you were doing in Haiti itself.
I mean, we had a number of courses that we taught over the course of 3 years. I taught a course on the history of Haiti. Deborah taught a number of other courses. But actually, in some ways, we also, perhaps the most interesting area was this kind of zone of what became kind of group independent studies. So the model of independent studies has long existed in the humanities, of course. They tend to be rather individualistic affairs, at least as usually practiced, like a lot of humanities research. And sort of the whole point here was to move away from that model. So what emerged, I mean, we had, at our first meeting, we had, I think, 50 students show up. The paint was still drying because this whole building had been renovated. We ended up with 27 students signed up for 27 independent studies, right? And we had graduate students and so forth. But what quickly emerged as a case was that what we really need to do was organize people around kind of projects, right? And around questions and issues that were coming up. I mean, a couple of clear examples. One was a law school project. Someone had approached the law school about creating a new law about violence against women that would draw on kind of global examples, but also specifically engage with the history of feminist movements and women's rights in Haiti. So what we had is there were law students who knew about law and women's rights, but not that much about Haiti. And we had a group of students who had taken classes on Haiti, had studied Creole, and we kind of partnered them. Another was around cholera in Haiti. Cholera in Haiti actually emerged after the Haiti lab began, so it was October of 2010. But very quickly, this is Deborah and Victoria Szabo did this, organize a group of students to study the history of the epidemiology around cholera in Haiti, and ended up actually publishing an article in the CDC journal based on what the students did. So this kind of way of taking questions that were, quite urgent questions being proposed in Haiti, and then showing how kind of humanities work could engage and influence how we thought about it.
So the article they wrote, as I remember, is a historical account of cholera in Haiti that helped the CDC to make the case that it hadn't existed in Haiti before, right?
Yeah.
So that this was a singular act, or a singular epidemic.
It was the first epidemic.
And it had some repercussions in terms of tracing where the cholera came from.
I mean, if it was immediately that, because by the time the article came out, I mean, it's pretty clear that this was a Nepalese strand and that sort of thing. What was interesting, I mean, what happened is essentially the journalistic accounts were all saying there has been cholera in Haiti for 50 years, or 30 years, or 100 years, it pointed out nobody really knew. And so it had never been asked as a question, had there been cholera in Haiti before? I mean, really, maybe it had been asked by someone, but it hadn't been asked in detail. But what Deborah and Victoria realized is that's a question historians can answer, right? And they can answer it by going to 19th century newspapers. I mean, so it turned out to be a very archival thing, which is because when there was a cholera outbreak, newspapers talked about it because ship captains needed to know about it, so they would avoid going there. So when there was cholera, it showed up in the press. And so they were able to look through really thoroughly through the press and at least make a very strong case that there had never been an outbreak based on an absence of outbreak, and also noting some things that the Haitian government had done specifically to try to avoid cholera, perhaps seemingly successfully.
So that's one of the theories of history we've been talking about a lot in this class is how you use the past in order not only to understand the present, but issues in the present illuminate and make a kind of history.
Right.
Sounds like a great
Yeah, because there's a bigger point, which is, a lot of what we were doing over and over again was, a lot of people were interested in thinking about Haiti and helping Haiti, right, at that moment. And in some ways, our response was constantly say, well, let's learn first, whether you learn language first. You are going to be a lot more useful in Haiti if you speak Creole, if you're interested in doing something. So you can take Creole at Duke, there's classes, educate yourself there, but also to try to really understand what's going on in Haiti, what was the situation. I mean, Haiti is a very odd and unique situation currently because of the intensity of international aid, right? It's the country that has there's the most international organizations, and NGOs there, but it also has this very unique and interesting history that shapes that process. And so there's a lot about it that, in some ways that kind of deepened his humanistic knowledge really transforms the way people approach the question. I mean, in some ways we were trying to always highlight the way in which the problems that might seem simple at first were, of course, incredibly complicated. And so the urge to find a solution, we're always sort of pointing, if a solution was easy, it would have already been figured out by Haitians themselves, right? If it was that easy to figure out. So the fact is that you have a whole concatenation of historical circumstances that create the context. And part of that is also just, in some ways, just confronting and going against a lot of the dominant visions of Haiti that you have that are circulating, that are quite simplistic. So.
Were any of the students in the lab able to actually go to Haiti?
Many students went to Haiti, yeah, because many of the students went on the Duke Engage program. I mean, it was two directions. Some students went on Duke Engage and then they came back kind of fascinated and thought, how do I learn more about Haiti? And so they came to the lab. Other students started in the lab and then went on the Duke and Gates program. And in addition to that Duke and Gates program, a number of students ended up going for different kinds of research trips.
We're sitting in front of a very beautiful installation that was part of the Haiti Lab. Can you tell us about this?
Right. So actually, this was really the first thing we did, and I always sort of cite that the first expenditure of the Haiti Lab was 20 cans of resin, and that was, and then also we submitted a lot of receipts from the Scrap Exchange, which is this venerable Durham institution of recycled art. During the summer as we were preparing the Haiti Lab, we had already invited Edouard Duval, who's a Haitian artist who had visited here before, who had also had connections with him from before. And he was going to come to give a speech as part of a series on disaster and talk about his work aiding Haitian artists after. But he said to us, I'm an artist, I'd like to create something. Rather than just come and give a talk, let's create something and then we can sort of talk about that. So he came up with this idea that he had used in other formats before. Each of these is a resin panel that were made in molds. There's a mold and you kind of put layers of resin down. And then on top of each layer after it dried, you could place objects or images. These are images just manipulated on computers, so digital work, and then printed on transparencies and just placed in the resin. Each of these has about 4 or 5 layers of resin. So you put a layer of resin down, it will dry. So that's the technical aspect. Then the conceptual aspect is, you have a square. Each of these squares was made by a different student or faculty or visitor, although, some of us made more than one, but the square was kind of, to some extent, a discrete thing, like each square was its own thing. And then, of course, they were going to be assembled together to be a kind of monument and memorial to the earthquake and a kind of a reference or a kind of evocation of all kinds of themes of Haitian history. So it was a very horizontal process. It was kind of perfect for the lab in a sense. Edouard showed us the technique. He said, I've made these before, but what he'd never had actually is a group of collaborators who had a lot of access to sort of historical images of Haiti. So he made these before, often with personal objects. So one in Miami where students brought personal objects from their family.
This was a little bit more humanistic in the sense that the whole point was to evoke different parts of Haitian history. And we can kind of bring a group of students who are studying Haitian history to look at this. And like almost every important theme about the country is somewhere represented, right?
Can you point out
different
just a few
figures?
of those?
Just behind you here, you have Dessalines, who's the founder, sort of the founder of the country who declares independence in 1804. This was made by co-director Deborah Jensen. There's a manuscript in here signed by Dessalines, a figuration of him, his signature, and also the evocation of his love of dance. So that was a kind of part of the. You have here; these are images from the Haitian Revolution. Here you have an image to the other side of the Haitian palace as collapsed after the earthquake, but above it is our images of the Haitian Revolution, so talking about these cycles of war and disaster.
So a span of a couple hundred years.
Yeah, almost. Everything from evocation of indigenous Taino origins that are here to very contemporary. There's one here of graffiti that came up right after the earthquake. Here you have an image of one of the great Haitian 20th century writers. So yeah, you have. Both the kind of rather immediate recognizable images and then images that are, and some of these images are extremely recognizable, at least for people familiar with Haiti, and some are not. Some are, there's some cases where we sort of deconstruct and evoke very famous images, and then there's other images that are less well known. And some are very personal. There's one here, which is a student who'd studied Creole, which is essentially a selection of the most important Creole words she thought of when she thought of Haiti, right? So it's a kind of linguistic evocation. So.
Well, we will put up on the Coursera site the link to the website that talks about all of
these. Because you can look at each one and each one has a
It's
text.
a great metaphor for the history and the present and art and history and all of those things, and politics.
And it was, part of the point was, again, it might seem strange that the first thing we did, and there was a lot of urgent issues in Haiti, was to make a work of art, right? But there's a way in which we thought that made sense as a way of taking stock of mourning, of kind of evoking this history. And it was a really good, it was a great process for many people involved. It was also an important process for many people who are textually, focused, and or the fetishization of text in humanities, right? And all of us were forced to then think visually. And almost no one who did these besides Edouard Duval-Carrière and one or two other people is in any way a visual artist, but in any trained sense, right? Some of the students were visual art students, but many of these were made by people for whom the idea of doing visual art was already a kind of, a bit of an obstacle or barrier or a
fantastic.
challenge.
The last lesson, Paradigm 2, was about unlearning, and we did that at the National Museum of Art, so this is really another example of how art can sometimes make you go into paradigms or assumptions you didn't, and look at them in a different way, a way you didn't know in a way you didn't even know you could look.
Yeah, and I would say, I realized later when I gave a talk, I was writing a history of Haiti at the same time as I was working on this project, and I made 5 blocks for this, and each of the blocks is actually basically correlates to one of the chapters in my books. So I kind of wrote the book and made the blocks in some relation to each other, and I think the writing was affected by the visual work. So it's kind of interesting in that sense, just in terms of, so that just in the pure sense of kind of research at the university, having these kind of open spaces of innovation actually, I think, can transform what people do.
It's fantastic. You've moved on and you're now going to be running a new institute at Duke called Scholars in Public. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
And this is, actually a lot of the ideas of it come out of this Haiti Lab experience. But the idea is really to sort of create a space of debate and exchange and critique about the ways in which research and the university can engage with broader publics, right? And that can mean everything from kind of intervening in the media and journalism and blogging to kind of building from the ground up various kinds of platforms through which research can be shared with broader publics. As well as we're really interested in thinking about kinds of collaborations with artists or musicians so that a kind of research and various kinds of things can influence the arts. So it's still, it's also a very experimental idea, but the idea is to take very seriously the idea that the university kind of has a mission to obviously to constantly be engaged beyond its walls and to be in dialogue with bigger publics. And so.
And then there's a question we ask everybody. Who is your favorite teacher? And is there something you learned from that teacher that you still think about in your present life? More than one teacher.
Yeah, I'll give 2 bookends. One, I always remember this, Mr. Hood was his name.
Hood.
One of my great high school teachers who was completely insane, this kind of, and he taught politics and was always getting in trouble because he was a little, radical and all this stuff. But he was just a teacher that kind of had this incredible passion for all that was going on and connecting past and present. So I remember him vividly from 10th grade, But actually, and the other person is my mentor in graduate school, Fernando Cornel, who's the chair of my dissertation committee, who is a Venezuelan anthropologist that's kind of remarkably wide-ranging thinker, but also just had this kind of omnivorous intellect, right? That he kind of had this way of just being curious about everything and taking something that seemed simple and then it would get more and more complicated. And also this kind of, he was very, I think, committed to the idea that thinking and kind of conviviality and kind of collaboration work together, right? That there's, that we're not monks and that, it's in kind of exchange that you kind of get the best ideas. So I think is, there was always this sense that the teacher and the student were engaged in kind of learning from each other, which was an important lesson.
Do you know Mr. Hood's first name?
I wish I did.
That was a trick. That was a trick. My favorite teacher was Mrs. Lippman, and I think her first name was Mrs.
Mr. And he wasn't at all like a Mr.
I know, nor was Mrs. Lippman, but it's funny how we carry those things with us forever. They will forever be Mrs. Lippman. Thank you so much for spending the time with us.